the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is on a four-nation Africa tour this week. Yesterday he was in Egypt, today he's in the Republic of Congo, and later he will head to Uganda and to Ethiopia. The trip then designed to strengthen Russian ties on the continent and to counter accusations that Russia is responsible for the mounting food crisis in the developing world. To discuss more, our foreign affairs commentator Douglas Herbert is with me. So, Doug, four rather different African countries here. What do you think this tour is primarily about?
Look, I mean, the Russians see this as a charm offensive in Africa, but look, let's be honest, there's very little that's charming about this visit. What's going on here is exactly what you just said. This is all about a counter-narrative, and I will use the word counter-narrative to the real narrative, the reality. And the counter-narrative basically is that the West and not Russia, I'll say it again, the West and not Russia is to blame for the global hunger crisis. That is the accusations that essentially Russia has been exporting hunger to a lot of countries, both in Africa and the Mideast, that desperately need the Russian market and the Ukrainian market for their food needs, for their grain. Listen, what's been going on here? You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. Basically, Russia, this is the narrative, Russia has been blocking Ukrainian ports, preventing millions, tens of millions of tons of desperately needed wheat from getting to the countries that need them most, in mostly the Middle East and Africa and also parts of Asia. At the same time, Russia has been, I'll avoid the word stealing, siphoning off, let's say, grain from Ukrainian-based silos to get them to the African markets, basically putting the Africans in almost hostage situation, using food as that proverbial weapon. Look, most of the African nations, they've largely avoided in any way taking sides in this war, not because they perhaps don't have moral convictions about it and they don't actually deep down know whose side they're on. It's because they are literally hostage in many ways to Russia. There are a lot of energy deals, there's a lot of commodities deals, there's a lot of weapons deals. In many cases, Russia has often, in certain countries, deployed Kremlin-linked mercenaries to certain regions to either foment movements or to prop up certain movements or certain leaders. Africa, at the end of the day, is not in the luxury that a lot of perhaps wealthier, richer Western countries are of being able to call it out for its dissembling and its lies and its cynicism, and a foreign policy which can only be called a through-the-looking-glass policy. As in Alice in Wonderland, you pick up that glass, the world isn't quite what it appears to be. Everything that Sergei Lavrov is doing right now is trying to turn the reality on its head, turn it on its side, and he's going through four countries which he knows are, to varying degrees, very dependent on him.
And dependent on that grain as well, coming from Ukraine. Now, there was this deal, wasn't there, a landmark deal on grain a week or so ago now, but there were then these Russian strikes on the port of Odessa. So does that mean that that grain deal is no longer viable?
No, not at all. Look, even Ukraine is saying that it's hoping to be able to press ahead and to resume its grain exports, in the next days or weeks. Now, it acknowledges that, obviously, if you keep having a pattern of this, Russian missile strikes coming in and hitting the ports that are supposed to be the very ports from which this wheat is being shipped out, even if those silos aren't specifically targeted or hit, it's going to complicate things. Instead of taking a days or a week or so to get that grain through the Black Sea and to markets, it's going to take 3, 4, 5 weeks. It's going to slow things down. But look, both Russia and Ukraine, it's in both of their interests to make sure that this deal works. Even if Russia wants to flex its muscle and shows at the end of the day it could do what it wants and still have its deal, the reality is that Ukraine gets about $1 billion in export revenue per month for its grain. It desperately needs these revenues. It can't afford to have it cut off. Russia, you could say, wants to diminish or deplete or destroy Ukraine's agriculture market, its ability to have an economic lifeline to sustain its economy, make it thrive. You could say that, but Russia, too, is a giant market for the very same wheat and grain, and it goes out through Ukraine's ports. That's why I say it's in the interest of both countries to make this deal work. That said, Russia so far isn't making it any easier, and who's to rule out more strikes of this nature in the future? Remember, the reality on the ground at the end of the day is whatever Russia says it is. So whatever Russia does, what actually happens is what Russia says happened, and you can't do anything about it.
Douglas Herbert, thank you for your analysis.